The room was alive with laughter, the kind of laughter that came from people who had never tasted hunger. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, bouncing their light on tables dressed in white silk lined with crystal glasses and golden cutlery. It was the grand charity dinner of Mrs. Eleanor Kensington, one of the wealthiest women in the city, known not only for her billions but also for her arrogance. At the far corner of the hall, almost invisible, stood Amara, a young black woman dressed in a faded waiter's uniform that looked 2 sizes too big. She clutched a tray with shaking hands, weaving between tables filled with powerful guests. Her smile was polite, but behind it lay a storm of hunger, pain, and dreams. Amara wasn't meant to be there. She was just a temporary hire, a struggling orphan trying to pay for her younger brother's school fees. Life had been unkind, her parents gone too soon, her brother falling sick often, and her landlord threatening eviction. But one thing Amara carried with her was a secret: she could cook. Not just cook, her food carried a soul, the kind that could turn strangers into family with a single bite. But to the rich people in that hall, she was nothing more than a shadow, a hand that cleared their plates and refilled their glasses. "Excuse me, girl?" The sharp voice cut through Amara's thoughts. She turned and saw Mrs. Kensington waving her manicured hand impatiently. Sitting beside her was a woman in a pristine white chef's uniform, Chef Gabriella, the billionaire's personal cook, famous for her French delicacies and arrogance. Amara hurried forward. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Kensington's eyes scanned her like one would a stain on glass. "Be careful with that tray. Last week one of your kind spilled wine on a senator's suit. Do you know how much it cost?" The guests laughed. Heat rose to Amara's face, but she bit her tongue. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not tonight. Mrs. Kensington's eyes narrowed mischievously. "Tell me, little waiter, do you even know what real food tastes like, or do you survive on, what do you people eat, rice and beans?" The laughter grew louder. Amara's hands trembled, but she whispered, "Food is food, ma'am, and sometimes simple food carries more love than expensive dishes." The room grew quiet for a moment. Mrs. Kensington raised an eyebrow, shocked that the poor girl had dared to speak, but then she threw her head back and laughed. "Love in food, how amusing." She glanced at Gabriella. "Did you hear that? This girl thinks she knows something about cuisine." Gabriella smirked. "Maybe she believes she could cook better than me." That was when Mrs. Kensington's eyes gleamed with a cruel idea. She snapped her fingers and the hall quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced dramatically, "we have entertainment for tonight. This poor little waiter seems to believe she understands food better than my world-class chef, so let us test her." The crowd cheered. Amara's heart dropped. "If you cook better than my chef," Mrs. Kensington declared with a mocking grin, "I'll fire her on the spot. But if you fail, you'll lose this job and never step foot in my events again. Do you dare accept?" The entire hall turned to Amara. She froze, the tray heavy in her hands. Her mind screamed no, she couldn't risk it. Her brother needed her salary, but deep inside another voice whispered, "This is your chance. This is your moment to prove yourself." Amara's breath shook as she looked at Mrs. Kensington's piercing eyes. She knew this wasn't just a challenge, it was humiliation. If she agreed, she could fail. If she refused, she'd look weak. But then she remembered the nights her brother, Chitty, cried himself to sleep from hunger. She remembered how she had promised him that one day her cooking would change their lives. Lifting her chin, Amara whispered, "I accept." Gasps filled the room. Mrs. Kensington clapped mockingly. "Oh, how brave! Let's give the girl a chance, shall we? Chef Gabriella will prepare a dish, and so will our little waiter. The guests will judge blindly." The challenge was set. The guests sipped wine and murmured excitedly as Amara was escorted into the grand kitchen. Stainless steel gleamed under bright lights, pots and pans lined like soldiers ready for battle. Gabriella stood at the counter, her every movement sharp and practiced, her eyes burning with disdain. "So," Gabriella sneered, "do you even know how to hold a knife properly?" Amara ignored her, running her hands across the ingredients. She could smell them, the tomatoes, garlic, onions, herbs. Cooking wasn't about prestige to her, it was about soul. The time began. Gabriella immediately got to work, chopping vegetables with machine-like precision, her pans sizzling with butter and wine. The smell filled the air, French elegance in motion. Amara, however, closed her eyes for a moment and thought of home. She thought of her mother's hands guiding her in their small kitchen, showing her how to stir a pot of jollof rice, how to fry plantain until golden brown, how to pour love into every grain of food. Opening her eyes, she got to work. Her knife moved with rhythm, her pan singing with flavor. She chose a simple but powerful dish, smoky jollof rice with grilled chicken and fried plantains. It was not just food, it was memory, it was love, it was survival. In the dining hall, Mrs. Kensington stirred her wine with boredom. "This is pointless. Do you really think anyone will prefer a poor girl's food over my chef?" A senator chuckled. "Sometimes the underdog surprises you." Minutes passed like hours. Sweat dripped down Amara's brow as she plated her dish with shaking hands. Gabriella smirked at her own masterpiece, a golden-browned salmon resting on a bed of asparagus with a rich lemon butter sauce. Both dishes were carried out, covered, and placed before the panel of guests. The covers were lifted. The judges gasped at the sight, the elegance of Gabriella's salmon versus the vibrant colors of Amara's jollof. One by one, the guests tasted. Gabriella's dish melted on their tongues, smooth and delicate. Nods of approval followed. Then they tasted Amara's food, silence, then wide eyes, then smiles. The smoky flavor, the spice that danced but did not burn, the sweetness of the plantain that wrapped the rice in comfort, it was unlike anything they had tasted before. It wasn't just food, it was emotion, it was home. "Remarkable," whispered one guest, "it feels alive." Another said, "I feel like I can taste her story in every bite." The hall buzzed, Gabriella's smile faded. Mrs. Kensington's face darkened, but she kept her composure. "Interesting, but let's not be hasty, we must tally the votes." The votes were cast secretly, slips of paper collected in a bowl. The guests waited in suspense, whispers filling the hall. Amara's hands trembled as she stood silently, her heart pounding like a drum. Finally, Mrs. Kensington stood to announce the result. Her lips curled, ready to humiliate the girl. But when she opened the first slip, her smile faltered. "Amara," it read. The second slip, "Amara." The third, "Amara." Gasps filled the hall. Gabriella's face went pale. Amara's knees nearly gave way. The room erupted, people clapped, some cheered, but Mrs. Kensington's eyes burned with fury, refusing to accept defeat. This is not over," she hissed. And as Amara stood there, overwhelmed, she didn't realize her life had just changed forever. The hall still buzzed with shock. Nobody had expected it. Nobody thought a poor, timid waiter could outshine a chef trained in the finest kitchens of Paris. Yet the slips of paper didn't lie, Amara's food had touched their souls. Mrs. Eleanor Kensington stood stiff, her face frozen into a tight smile that barely disguised her fury. Applause echoed around the room, but to her, it was mockery that her pride, her chef, and her reputation had been beaten by a girl in a cheap, faded uniform. She raised her hand, the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice sweet but sharp like glass, "I see you are entertained, but remember, tonight was only a game. One lucky guess in the kitchen does not make a chef. My Gabriella has years of training and prestige. This girl, she has nothing." Laughter rippled again, though not as strong as before. People were unsure now. Amara's dish still lingered on their tongues. Mrs. Kensington's eyes locked on Amara, cold and calculating. "Tell me, girl, what else can you do, or was this your one trick, your only miracle?" Amara's throat tightened, but before she could answer, one of the guests, a senator, spoke up. "Eleanor, I must disagree, that was no trick, that girl has talent." He turned to Amara. "Young lady, do you cater?" Amara froze. Cater? She wanted to scream yes, but fear gripped her. She was just a waiter. She didn't even have her own kitchen. Mrs. Kensington smirked at her hesitation. "You see, empty words, she cannot even speak for herself." The senator frowned. "Perhaps she needs another chance, a proper challenge." The hall erupted with agreement. "Yes, let her cook again." Amara's heart pounded. Another challenge? Tonight? She didn't even know if she could, but before she could speak, Mrs. Kensington raised her hands dramatically. "Fine," she said, her smile returning like a snake. "Tomorrow evening at my mansion, a private dinner for my closest circle. This girl will cook for us all, and we shall truly see if she is anything more than a lucky accident." The room gasped. The trap was set. After the event, Amara walked the dark streets back to her small, crumbling apartment. Her shoes pinched, her legs ached, but it was nothing compared to the storm in her chest. Her younger brother Chitty rushed to the door when she entered. "Sister, you're late, did you get in trouble?" Amara collapsed into a chair, covering her face. I don't know, Chitty, something happened tonight." She explained everything, the challenge, the dish, the votes, and the new test waiting for her. Chitty's eyes widened like saucers. "So you cooked for billionaires and they loved it?" Amara nodded weakly. "Then you can do it again," Chitty said, his voice full of hope. "Sister, this is your chance, don't let them scare you." Amara bit her lip. "But Chitty, what if I fail? What if tomorrow they laugh at me again? We'll lose everything." Her brother took her hand. "You've never failed me, not once. Mama used to say your food carries your heart. If you put your heart in it, no one can take that from you." Tears filled Amara's eyes. For the first time she believed maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. The next evening, Amara stood in front of the towering Kensington mansion. Its gates loomed like the entrance to another world. She wore the same waiter's uniform, washed and ironed until it was crisp, though still faded. Her hands clutched a small paper bag of spices, her secret weapon. Inside, the mansion glittered with wealth. Golden chandeliers, marble floors, paintings worth millions. At the long dining table sat a dozen of Mrs. Kensington's closest friends, business moguls, politicians, and socialites. They eyed Amara with curiosity, some with pity, some with disdain. At the head of the table sat Mrs. Kensington herself, dressed in diamonds, smiling coldly. Beside her, Chef Gabriella stood tall, her arms crossed, watching Amara like a predator. "Welcome, dear girl," Mrs. Kensington purred. "Tonight you will prepare a 3-course meal for us. Appetizer, main dish, dessert. If you succeed, perhaps we'll admit you have talent. If not, well, you can imagine the shame." Amara swallowed hard. 3 courses. She had never cooked something so grand before, especially for people like this. The guests chuckled, enjoying the spectacle. To them, this was entertainment. Amara entered the massive kitchen, larger than her entire apartment. Stainless steel gleamed everywhere, ingredients stacked in abundance, but abundance was not comfort, it was intimidation. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Mama, guide my hands." For the appetizer, she chose pepper soup, light, flavorful, warming to the soul. As she chopped the herbs and boiled the stock, memories of her mother's laughter filled her ears. For the main course, she decided on egusi soup with pounded yam, a dish rich in flavor and heritage, one that carried strength and love. And for dessert, she improvised with what she found, ripe mangoes, cream, and honey, to create a sweet, refreshing ending. Every move she made was careful but passionate. She wasn't just cooking, she was storytelling. Meanwhile, Gabriella lurked in the corner, whispering to a kitchen assistant. Something about the way her eyes darted toward Amara's pot didn't feel right. As Amara stirred her pepper soup, she stepped aside to grab herbs. In that moment, Gabriella slipped closer and poured a pinch of powder into the pot. Her lips curled into a cruel smile. When Amara returned, she frowned, something smelled off. The soup's aroma was too sharp, too bitter, panic gripped her chest. Had she made a mistake? Was she failing already? She tasted a spoonful and nearly gagged. It was poisoned with too much salt or something worse. Tears welled in her eyes, she couldn't serve this. Her time was running out, guests were waiting, she had to think fast. Heart-pounding, Amara threw out the ruined soup and started again from scratch. Her hands flew, chopping, stirring, boiling. Every second counted. Sweat rolled down her face, but she refused to stop. "They want to see me fail," she thought, "but I won't give them the pleasure." Finally, the dishes were ready. One by one, servants carried them to the dining table. The guests leaned forward eagerly. First came the pepper soup. The guests sipped cautiously, then their eyes widened. The broth danced on their tongues, rich and spicy but comforting like warmth on a rainy day. Murmurs of approval spread around the table. Mrs. Kensington's smile faltered slightly. Next came the main dish. The egusi soup was thick, flavorful, and perfectly paired with the soft pounded yam. Some guests who had never eaten African food before hesitated, but the moment they tasted it, their faces lit up. "This is extraordinary," one whispered. "It feels like home, even though I've never had it before," another said. Finally came the dessert, the mango cream with honey melted on their tongues, simple, fresh, unforgettable. The guests applauded softly, impressed despite themselves. Mrs. Kensington clapped slowly, her eyes burning with hidden rage. Impressive, very impressive indeed. But then she stood, her voice sharp, and yet this girl cheated. Gasps filled the room, Amara's head snapped up. What? No, I didn't. She sabotaged my chef's kitchen, Mrs. Kensington lied smoothly. I saw her with my own eyes. She tampered with ingredients, spilled things, and nearly ruined the dinner. The guests looked uncertain, whispers spread. Amara's heart broke. After everything, after pouring her soul into every dish, this woman still sought to destroy her. Shall we believe a poor waiter over me? Mrs. Kensington asked coldly. The room fell silent, all eyes turned to Amara. Tears stung her eyes, but she stood tall. Believe what you want, but you tasted my food, you know it carried no lies. The room hung in silence, some guests looked guilty, others suspicious. Amara felt her chest tighten as though the walls were closing in. Just then, the senator from the previous night rose to his feet. His voice was strong, firm. Billionaire, he said, glaring at Mrs. Kensington, enough games. We all know talent when we see it, and this girl has more honesty in her cooking than you have in your entire fortune. The room erupted with shock. Mrs. Kensington's face turned red with fury. Amara stood frozen. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would either destroy her or become the doorway to a destiny she never imagined. The dining hall was charged with tension, the kind that made every heartbeat sound louder than the ticking of the clock. Amara stood trembling, her palms damp as the senator's words echoed through the room. This girl has more honesty in her cooking than you have in your entire fortune. A silence followed. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others dared to nod in agreement. For the first time, Mrs. Billionaire Kensington, untouchable billionaire, queen of arrogance, looked cornered. Her lips curled into a thin smile. So we are to trust this orphan over me, she said with venom. You people forget yourselves. Without my wealth, without my influence, none of you would even sit here. But her words rang hollow. The guests had tasted the truth in Amara's food. They had felt the love in it, something money could not buy. The senator spoke again. Billionaire, power and wealth mean nothing without humanity. Tonight, this young woman reminded us of that. Applause began slowly, one pair of hands, then another, until the hall filled with clapping. Amara's knees nearly gave way as tears streamed down her face. She had not just cooked food, she had won hearts. Mrs. Kensington's face turned crimson. She slammed her glass on the table, the sharp crack silencing the applause. Enough, she roared. If you fools want to believe her fairy tales, so be it, but in my house my word is law, and I say she leaves now. The guards moved forward. But before they could touch Amara, Gabriella, the chef, spoke. Her voice trembled but carried weight. Madam, it was I who tampered with her food, not her. Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned to Gabriella, who lowered her head in shame. I poured salt into her soup. I couldn't stand the thought of losing my position, but she still overcame it. Her food was better even with my sabotage. The room erupted in murmurs. The truth had been laid bare. Amara stood frozen, tears blurring her vision. Gabriella, her enemy, had confessed. The senator rose again. There you have it, Billionaire. Your pride is your downfall. Tonight this girl has shown us what true talent and honesty mean. If you do not honor her victory, then you dishonor us all. One by one, the guests began standing in silent protest. Powerful men and women, billionaires and leaders, all turning against Mrs. Kensington. Her empire of arrogance crumbled before her very eyes. Mrs. Kensington's lips trembled. For the first time she looked small, powerless. Get out, she whispered to Amara, her voice weak. But before Amara could move, the senator stepped forward. No, she stays. In fact, he turned to Amara, his eyes kind. Young lady, would you consider working for me instead? My family needs a personal chef, one who can cook with heart, not just skill. I'll pay you double what you earn here. Amara's mouth fell open, the room gasped. This was more than she had ever dreamed of. But then she shook her head slowly. Thank you, sir, but I don't want to be trapped in anyone's shadow. I want to build something of my own. a place where people from every walk of life can taste food filled with love. Her voice, though shaky, carried strength. One day, I'll open a restaurant not for the rich only but for everyone, even the poor, because food is not just for the privileged, it's for the soul. Tears glistened in many eyes, even some of the stern businessmen clapped. Word of the dramatic dinner spread like wildfire in the city. Newspapers carried headlines about the poor waiter who defeated a billionaire's chef. Social media buzzed with admiration for Amara, calling her the girl who cooked with love. Donations began pouring in from people moved by her story. Within months, Amara managed to rent a small shop at the corner of her neighborhood. With her brother Chitty always at her side, she opened a tiny restaurant. The sign above the door read, "Soul on a Plate." At first, it was just locals, market women, taxi drivers, students. But soon, rich and poor alike lined up outside her doors. They didn't come for fancy chandeliers or golden cutlery. They came because in every spoonful they tasted her story. Her food healed the hungry, comforted the weary, and reminded the wealthy of humility. And as for Mrs. Kensington, her arrogance cost her dearly. Guests began avoiding her parties, her influence waned, and Gabriella, ashamed of her betrayal, left her service. She became a shadow of the queen she once was, a lesson that pride without compassion leads only to downfall. One evening, months later, Amara stood at the counter of her bustling little restaurant. Chitty was serving drinks, laughing with customers. The air smelled of jollof rice, pepper soup, and freshly baked bread. Amara looked around and smiled. This was her dream, not diamonds or mansions, but a place where food united people. As she wiped her hands on her apron, a young girl walked up shyly. "Miss Amara, my mama says your food is like magic. Will you teach me how to cook one day?" Amara bent down, her eyes warm. "Of course, little one, but remember, it's not just about cooking, it's about putting your heart into it. That's the true secret." The girl grinned, and Amara felt her chest swell with pride. She had found her purpose. Amara's journey was more than just about cooking. It was about dignity, resilience, and the power of staying true to oneself. She had faced humiliation, sabotage, and lies, yet she overcame them not with arrogance or revenge but with love and honesty. And through it all, one truth stood clear. True greatness is not measured by wealth or titles but by the hearts we touch and the legacy we leave behind. In a world where pride and power often overshadow humility and kindness, what would you choose, wealth without compassion or simplicity filled with love? Think about it deeply. Comment where you are watching from because your voice matters here. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more powerful, emotional stories like this one.